Good morning. Thanks for joining me on the Meg Ellefson Show. I appreciate you tuning in as always during this hour. Very happy to have joining me from the Institute for Reforming Government, General Counsel and Director of Center for Investigative Oversight, Jake Curtis. Good morning, Jake. How are you?
Great. How are you, Meg?
Good, thank you. I can't imagine anyone is going to escape this cold weather. It doesn't matter where you are in the state of Wisconsin. It's ugly out there.
It's cold down here.
Yeah. It's not far enough south, I guess, where you are,
No,
right?
no, not at all.
The sun isn't shining more bright. It is actually. The sun is out, but that's very deceptive, just as it was yesterday. It's not a fun time to be outdoors. But I can never figure out how animals survive. Like wildlife survives in this kind of weather.
Well, we have chickens. That was our new addition
Oh,
over the few months, and we have a heater. And at last I checked, they're still there, still alive. So
are you raising them for the to
eggs?
brine them and have
No,
chicken
no,
legs?
eggs.
Thanks, I know. I'm teasing you, but probably a different kind of chicken if you weren't getting them for eggs. Well, that's
Uh,
cool. Where?
above my expertise. I know we have them, we feed them, and we get eggs. That's about as much as I know.
All right. Well done. So and someone must have to clean the chicken coop. You assign that to another member of your family.
No, that's a dad duty. So,
Oh, shoot.
although the kids take very good care of them, otherwise. So,
Did you get them when they were chicks?
a few months old.
Oh, okay.
So they were pretty much full grown.
Oh, okay. Because I would imagine that would be something fun for the kids to see them when they're little like that. But all right.
Yeah.
Well, enough about uh,
Enough about.
chickens. Speaking of chickens, no, I guess what. Speaking of chickens, here's a good segue. What are the Democrats so afraid of? They're trying to reverse all of the positive reforms of Act 10.
Yeah. No, that was a good. Well done, Meg.
Thank
That was
you.
a good.
Thanks.
Um. Yeah. So I think what we're seeing right now is, if you look at the number of cases that were decided last term, right? So when you're looking at a court session, you kind of look at the term. They only decided 14 cases, only 4 of which were actually 4-3 kind of partisan or contested decisions. And so I think that was a head scratcher for a lot of people, but I think it's fairly obvious. We have a court that is relatively young when you look at Protasevich, Dalit, and Karofsky justices, uh, and Bradley that is retiring. Right, she obviously served, I think, several decades. The other 3 progressive members of the court are young, and so I think if you combine the relative youth of the court, they were kind of getting their sea legs under them for this last term, and then also the reality that as we head into this spring's election, it's a significant election. Again, Judge Bradley is retiring, and so that's an open seat, and that's really for the majority. It's the majority maker, and if the conservatives can flip that with Judge Schimmel, then it's a 4-3 conservative court. If Judge Crawford wins, we have probably a 4-3 progressive court for the foreseeable future, because Rebecca Bradley is then up next year, and after that is Judge Ziegler in 27. And so again, we're playing defense, right? The best case scenario in 26 and 27 is we preserve a 4-3 progressive majority by protecting that conservative seat. If we lose those seats, it gets worse. So this is why the spring election is so important. And back to your question, that's why I think we really didn't see an active court at all. I think they're kind of sitting on some of these big cases like Act 10. We have the abortion case that is in front of the court. They've already had oral argument. There's other cases working their way through the system. And Meg, you have been very kind to have us on in the past to talk about administrative law. It's not always the most exciting topic, but it's very important. There's one that I can think of off the top of my head, very important administrative law case that addresses the ability of the Joint Committee for the Review of Administrative Rules, JCRER, to really exercise authority. So that case would really impact a lot of the administrative reforms that were enacted throughout the Walker-Clayfish administration. And so I think what we're seeing is a court that's really just waiting to see what happens in spring, and if they're able to maintain that 4-3 progressive majority. I think the reality is I think we'll see the court's true nature, that they're going to start taking up a lot of these other cases and very systematically gut the reforms that again were implemented throughout the Walker-Clayfish administration, and I think we could see things like school choice. People forget, again, this is where I think the court has been strategic. There was a challenge to school choice. I think it was last year, maybe late 22. The court decided not to take it up, and again, I think that was pretty strategic because, frankly, I think it's problematic. That's a very, particularly in the Milwaukee area, you have a lot of families who don't want to send their kids to a failing MPS school. They want to have an option to send their kids to a good school like St. Marcus or St. Anthony's or any number of other religious or non-religious private schools. And that's a problem politically for the court. And that in and of itself is a problem because I think you have a court that thinks politically. And that's why I think the spring election, the voters have an important decision to make between a judge like Judge Schimmel, who I think views judicial philosophy through the lens of originalism and textualism, right? What does the text say? What was the original meaning? Versus somebody like Judge Crawford, who, let's be frank, Judge Protasewicz, I think in a watershed moment in 2023, really set the standard for the progressive judicial candidates in the state that they're going to express their values. I'm paraphrasing, but she used that word. And so it's values, somebody's personal values, versus judicial temperament and outlook. I think that's the decision in front of the voters this spring.
Gosh, if only you could be out on the campaign trail, Jake, saying that. I think it would. Hey, I'm going to invite you up here for an event. It would resonate, I think, with voters. But it's got to be boiled down, and I guess I used the example, and I spoke with a listener who called in during an earlier segment this morning and talking about the Supreme Court and the consequences if we do not elect Brad Schimmel. And I just think about where we were in 2020 when the state was shut down and what would have happened if we would have had a liberal majority on the Supreme Court at that time. We would have been like Minnesota, the oppressive policies of a Democrat governor, or his sidekick at the time, Andrea Palm, but we would have been living in misery. And instead, because of the constitutional conservative majority on the Supreme Court, we were set free here in Wisconsin.
Meg, I love that you bring that example up. I 100% agree, and frankly, I wish that more people brought up those examples. That I think, and again, I'm not a psychologist. I don't. Maybe there's some reflexive thing our minds do to try to push that sort of time period out of sight. I think about it all the time, and so I'm glad you're raising it because we had a governor and certain, at least members of this court, that were perfectly fine allowing the governor to extend emergency orders. And frankly, the policy issue aside, he was blatantly inconsistent with state statute, right? That the governor has a set amount of time, I forget if it was 30 or 60 days, right, to essentially set that emergency, and beyond that would require legislative approval. And as I recall, he just kind of continued to reset the emergency, and that clearly was not the intent of that emergency power. And right, but for a conservative Supreme Court that was willing to step in and prevent that executive abuse, you're exactly right. We would have, instead of a month and a half, 2 months of lockdowns, we would have had probably 8, 10 months. I mean, who knows how long that would have gone of people not being able to attend church, and I mean, and this is why I love that you bring that example up. These are fundamental rights, right? The ability under the First Amendment to gather and worship, the ability to assemble and get together, whether it's with I don't care if it's your local book club or your local political club, right? It doesn't have to be a political exercise of a right. It can be just any reason you're getting together to assemble, a Bible study. I mean, these are fundamental rights that were really ignored. And look, I mean, we had a serious pandemic, but it's important that we understand that there's always going to be risk, and individuals had to make certain decisions, and let's do everything we can to protect the vulnerable. But we were just across the board shutting down churches and businesses and schools, and beyond that, maybe initial 30 days when nobody really knew what was going on, it was the legislature and the Supreme Court that stepped in and tapped the brakes on those emergency powers. And that was fundamental in my mind. And those sorts of issues need to be brought up more.
Well, and I, unfortunately for our listeners, I'll never let that one go. I mean, it really, it was just something that, and I'm grateful for the fact that I think that Gen Z, which is my kids' generation, I think that that's in great part why Trump won, is because they can't let it go either. I mean, look where they were in their lives when all of that went down, and how it ruined graduations. It ruined my son. It was his freshman year in college, and he was forced to move out of the dorms, and I mean, have a virtual experience his freshman year in college. And that stuff, I think you can either have really positive memories about past events, or you can remember this and learn from it so it doesn't happen again. And I hope that translates to voting habits that will forever be solidified in the right direction.
Right. Well, I would love to do a whole segment with you, Meg, at some point on what took place and how we can prevent that from happening. The one thing I do want to quickly mention, just so we don't run out of time, is how important this Act 10 decision is. I know I sent you the op-ed I wrote, so I appreciate you taking a look at that. And I had an op-ed in American Habits, which is it's a kind of a newer outlet associated with the State Policy Network, and they do some really cool stuff. So AmericanHabits.org is their website. And so I had an op-ed that really breaks down the Act 10 decision. And I think a lot of people have been focusing on the policy side of it, which, right, that's fine. And certainly people are going to make, I think, a very strong policy argument as to what would happen if Act 10 is struck down, whether the number of savings is 15, 18, 20 billion. It's a big number. Just in the little school district that I live in, we homeschool our kids, but we live in a very good school district, Cedarburg, and they save millions in just allowing a competitive bid process for health insurance. So you extrapolate that across 426 school districts, right? 72 counties, hundreds of cities and towns and villages. It's pretty easy, I think, to get to that billion-dollar number, if not multiple billions of dollars. And so this would be crushing if overnight Act 10 is overturned. There's people are missing, I think, an important point in the policy side of this, and that is, look, we still have levy limits, right? So if all of a sudden overnight costs relating to personnel, health insurance, all those costs, if all of a sudden they go up, 10, 15%, it's not like your local unit of government can simply increase the property tax levy by 10 to 15%. They have levy limits. It's limited to net new construction, which most municipalities, they're happy with 2 to 3%. So what's going to happen? Well, either core services are going to be cut, or, and this is kind of the ugly irony of all this, is I actually think you'll see mass layoffs in public employment. So for all these progressives that are cheering on this litigation And if this Supreme Court ultimately affirms Judge Frost's decision out of Dayton County, you're either going to see core services cut or mass layoffs, right? Because you're just simply not going to be able to make up the difference unless all of a sudden the state comes in and with shared revenue increases that. But frankly, the Republican legislature compromised, and we saw a pretty significant increase in shared revenue last budget cycle. So the locals are doing okay. I mean, they're always going to want more shared revenue, but Act 10 has been that cost-saving measure that has allowed local units of government to operate within those levy limits. And so that's, from a policy standpoint, kind of the ugly reality. But I also wanted to note, and this is what my op-ed addresses, is the problem with the judicial reasoning, right? And this is why I think it's important that people, if not my op-ed, read other op-eds that actually look at the legal side, because this is a key question in the spring election. And that is kind of the basis for the decision out of Dane County, Judge Frost, was kind of a reexamination of rational basis review. And it sounds complicated, but it's really not. Basically, what rational basis review is, the court's going to look at a legislative act and say, was there any rational basis for this? And even if it's not well articulated by the legislature, there's actually an obligation on the court to see if there's anything that they can come up with that could justify the action, so long as it's obviously not unconstitutional, not inconsistent. You don't have conflicting statutes. If there's a rational basis, it should stand. And in this case, it's obvious that the legislature had a rational basis, right? Governor Walker and legislative leaders wanted to control property taxes. They wanted to control local spending, but they also didn't want to have labor unrest within law enforcement and jailers. You can agree or disagree with that policy, right? And you can make arguments on both sides. But from a judicial standpoint, their job is not to assess whether or not that was good policy. Their job is to identify whether or not there was any rational basis to make the decision that they did from a legislative standpoint. And Judge Frost's decision basically guts that. And the implications not only for Act 10, but again, as we started out your segment talking about all the other reforms, they're all at risk, because essentially this decision would be the template to essentially gut, I think, all the other reforms and argue that, well, the legislature lacked rational basis for again, whatever it is, Act 21 when it comes to administrative law reforms, right to work, prevailing wage. All the reforms that conservatives across the state work so hard for, I think, are at risk based on this legal reasoning in this decision.
Okay, so, I mean, everything you said makes sense. And I can't believe that reasonable Democrats would have trouble agreeing with you either. So is it all just payback for the unions? Is that what this fight is all about?
Well, to be fair, there's an equal protection argument. Again, I think it fails. I think we already have 2 Seventh Circuit decisions and Wisconsin Supreme Court decision that upheld Act 10. But there always was this equal protection issue. Again, that we the legislature, the governor, kind of carved out public safety. But again, I think that should survive a legal challenge. I think if you apply the rational basis review, I think you can arrive at a conclusion. And that's what a court should do, right? I mean, they should make the attempt to uphold the legislative determination, again, so long as it's constitutional, so long as you don't have inconsistent statutes. And so I think it should survive this challenge. And so then that, I think, does lead to, I think you have a court, and this is why I made the point earlier about there is a real attempt to change kind of the judicial outlook. We talk about originalism, we talk about textualism. There's kind of, I think, a couple things going on. I think there's definitely a movement to have a really robust kind of state constitutional analysis that can provide more rights than the federal Constitution. And I think most conservatives would maybe agree with that, right? That is possible. But I think where they kind of go off the rails is and again, we saw it in 2023, it still needs to be based on the text of whatever statute, or, if you're analyzing constitutional provision, it has to be based on the text, which is based on a 2004 decision. We have the whole framework. It's a Kalal is a decision out of 2004 written by Justice Sykes that kind of lays out in very kind of clear, methodical terms, or clear terms in a very methodical way, how you go about analyzing the text. And then you have kind of the concept of originalism. What was the original intent of the legislature? Not the current kind of political climate, right? That shouldn't have anything to do with it. It was the original intent. There is a very real effort on the part of the progressives within the judiciary on the left to infuse these values. That's why I call it a watershed moment in 2023. When I think that was always probably the case, but I don't think we had ever seen a judicial candidate basically admit publicly that, look, there may be situations where the text says one thing, kind of the original interpretation indicates one thing, but my values say another. And, by gosh, I was elected by the people of Wisconsin, and therefore they must support my values, and therefore if my values are inconsistent with the text or the original meaning, my values will prevail. That's, in my mind, what happened in 23, and that's why I think it's a watershed moment, and that's why I think it's so important that voters consider that when they go and vote in April 1st, do they support that sort of judicial philosophy, or do they support a judicial philosophy that's rooted in the text and the original meaning?
Jake Curtis. So first of all, excuse me, I didn't realize that you lived in Cedarburg. That's my husband's hometown, by the way. Been to Cedarburg.
So I want my Cedarburg friends kind of making light of the fact that I'm lying on radio. It's we're like 4 houses from Cedarburg.
What do you, Mequon?
Grafton.
Grafton is a fine community too, so I won't knock it. All right, so yes, would love to have you back to have a full conversation about the shamdemic for sure. And may I have your permission to repost your op-ed on WSAU.com?
Please do.
Giving you full credit and then its original source. So, all right, good. We'll do. All right, so, hey, thank you so much. And you're welcome back anytime. And obviously, challenge accepted. I'm all in on talking about what happened during the, as I like to call it, shamdemic that I will never forget, nor will I let anyone else forget.
Good. Yes. Well, stay in touch. Thank you, Meg.
Yes, thanks. Have a great day. Stay warm.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you. All right, going to the 10:30 news, followed by your calls on the other side, 715-845-2155 on the Meg Ellefson Show on WSAU.